everybody, my name is Kyle, welcome back to another video. Today, in this one, I'll be doing another tier list video. In this one, I'll be doing it on meta staples post-January 2024 ban list, but pre-Phantom Nightmare. I'm not going to include Phantom Nightmare just because, well, that comes out in a month, so I'll do another video once Phantom Nightmare comes out on this, but for this video, we're not including Phantom Nightmare. So without further ado, we do have a lot to talk about, especially since the ban list added a couple more staples for us as well. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So first things first, we're starting off with Dark Ruler No More. So I don't know, this card feels bad. It's maybe some side decks, like more towards niche, but I'll put it in some side decks. No, this feels bad. I don't know. Dark Ruler just isn't in a good position right now just because it doesn't really do anything against the Fire King matchup. Doesn't really do anything against the Rescue Ace matchup. Against, purely, they're going to have an unaffected monster against Lab. I mean, Lab is that's just a dead card against Lab. Mana Diem, they'll most likely get to a counter trap, so they're just going to negate the Dark Ruler. Anyways, it just doesn't feel good right now. There really isn't a deck where you could Dark Ruler just kills that deck, right? Dark Ruler just doesn't really do that much right now. So yeah, this is pretty much niche. It's not that great right now. I'm not going to put it in garbage because Dark Ruler is good, but this isn't the format for it. Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, the best card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Always will be played no matter what. It's going to be in most main decks. Just because, again, no matter what deck you're versing, Ash will always be live against that matchup. Against something like Branded, it's just an FTK, right? Against the Labyrinth matchup, Ashing the Big Welcome will always be nice. Ashing the Fire King Island now could be pretty nice as well. Ashing, the Diabellstar engine, once they activate the original Sinful Spoils, is going to be nice. It's a super good card. It's going to be in most people's main decks just because it is a power card. It's a really powerful card. Is it there are probably better hand traps in this, but the fact that it can hit every matchup, no matter what matchup you're versing against, is why it's in most people's main decks. Feather Duster will always be in most people's side decks. Could be crazy in some main decks, but most side decks, people will be playing Feather Duster. Change of Heart. So, this is interesting now because we now have 3 mind controls. So, Change of Heart gets a little bit worse because, you'll just play 3 mind control instead, right? Maybe you go crazy and go Snatch Steal mind control, or Snatch Steal, Change of Heart, and 3 mind control, max out on those cards. So I'm going to put this in some side decks just because if you're thinking about playing a kind of Snatch or a Change of Heart type of effect card, you want to go for mind control because you have 3 of those instead of the 1 Change of Heart, right? Maybe if you want either do that or you max on all of them, 3 mind control, 1 Change of Heart, 1 Snatch Steal, and stuff like that. But I'm going to put it in some side decks just because I think mind control being at 3 makes it where Change of Heart goes a little less just because it's only at 1. Next thing up is DD Crow. So the thing with DD Crow is every time I look at this card, I think it's good, especially since we're entering a new format. I feel like every time we enter a new format, I feel like DD Crow is the best, and the later we get in the format, the worse DD Crow gets. But it could be decent. Maybe we'll put it in some main decks, maybe moving to most side decks, just because, it hits the Fire King matchup for sure. It hits the Labyrinth matchup, either hitting the chandeliers and stuff like that, or you can hit the transaction rollback, target effect could be nice as well now. So this could be decent. Again, purely hitting the Black Cat's target in graveyard is nice as well. So this, theoretically, is always good, but the later in the format we get, we'll see if it actually pans out as a good card. But we'll put it in some main decks for now. Dark Hole, it's some side decks. It's a good card, but it's kind of in the same situation as Dark Ruler No More. Just there isn't really a deck that this completely hits out of nowhere. Fire Kings don't really care. Rescue doesn't care. They'll just go with their spell traps. Labyrinth doesn't really care. Purely will most likely have Noir, Mana Diem. They'll have negates for it anyways, right? So I don't know. This is some side decks. Contact Seed. Garbage. It's garbage. Everyone's playing SP Little Knight, so this just gives you free material for SP Little Knight. So yeah, pretty garbage. Nothing else to say about that. Dimensional Shifter. So this is always one of those cards. If you're going to play it, you're going to main deck it. If you Maybe you can play it in some side decks, maybe like Labyrinth could play it in the side deck. But it's probably going to be in some main decks just because you're either going to play Shifter in the main deck or maybe not even play it at all. It's kind of that consideration. Again, it can't be in most people's main decks because it doesn't, not all decks can play the Shifter. So again, if you're able to play under Shifter, then you're absolutely going to main deck this just because it's a powerhouse of a hand trap. But not all decks can play this. So that's why it's going to be in some main decks. Kaijus will always be in most people's side. It might be sliding down to some side decks. Again, the Kaijus only really hit the Purely matchup, and that's about it. So maybe in some people's side decks you'll see it, but probably not in most people's side decks right now. Forbidden Droplet. It's just, this is one of those formats you want to keep the hand advantage and stuff like that. So you don't want to like Droplet is absolutely a powerful card. Maybe you'll see it in some side decks. I don't know. It's a powerful card. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's the format for it right now. It's a card that I think you should have onto it. Like, make sure you have 3 copies of this card. But I just don't think this is the right format for Droplet for right now. Triple Tactic Talents. I mean, Talents is insane. It's probably going to be in most people's main decks just because, I mean, it's Talents. A lot of cards are activating, a lot of monster effects are going to be activating in the main phase if you're going first or going second, right? Like, this is always going to be a somewhat live card, so you want to play it because it does punish your opponent a lot. Either when you're going first, if they hand trap you, you get to look at your opponent's hand, or, going second, you can snatch steal a guy, or you can draw 2 cards, which is always just an option with Triple Tactic Talents. So, it's probably going to be in most of main decks, in my opinion. Infinite Impermanence, another card that's going to be in most people's main decks just because it pretty much hits every matchup out there, right? Especially like on the draw, if you draw this for turn, it's not even that bad. You can trade like a negate for it. So again, Imperm is a nice card. I think it's always going to be in most people's side decks because it's just one of those hand traps that will always be live. So you want to play the Infinite Impermanence in the main deck. Super Poly, this is a card that's probably going to be in some people's main decks right now just because against like the Fire King matchup, being able to super poly once they have the Garunix and the Kirin to prevent them from getting to the XYZ monster is always just going to be nice for that, and you're getting a body out of it against like Labyrinth as well. If they set up on multiple dark monsters, super poly them off the field, right? Especially if they're on like the Unchained version of the deck as well. I think this card is really good. It's going to be in some people's main decks. Most main decks, maybe not, but it's going to for sure be in some people's main decks for sure. Kurikara Divine Carnate. If we're talking like, this is probably like some side decks. If we're talking like post Phantom Nightmare, this probably moves up to most side decks. But for right now, it's in some side decks just because, I mean, Ash can search Kurikara. So maybe, actually, we'll put it in most side decks just because once the Snake Eyes stuff gets going, like Ash can search this, so if you don't really need any other level 1, you can search this off Ash going second. And you know what? We're going to put it in some side decks. I don't think it's going to be most people's side decks. We'll put it in some side decks. Book of Eclipse. It's a weird card. It's a weird card. I'm going to put it in most people's side decks. Because again, it's one of those cards that can hit a lot, right? But like against the Rescue matchup, it's not going to do that much. Against the Labyrinth matchup, it's probably not going to do that much either. And against like the Manadia matchups, I mean, they'll just have a negate for it. Purely, it does hit the Purely matchup, which is very, very nice. It also hits the Fire King somewhat. So like if they get to their Kirin and Garunix on field and they try to XYZ summon, you just Eclipse. But you'll probably have monsters on the field at that point anyway, so Eclipse might not be that great. Again, this is a weird card. I can see it being in most people's side decks, but I can see it in some side decks. You know what? We'll put it in some side decks. I just don't think it's really in a great position right now. Evenly Matched is going to be in most people's side decks, I feel like, right now. Just because, like, the problem with Feather Duster Lightning Storm is, like, against Labyrinth, if they have Eradicator, they're just going to rip this out of your hand. But I feel like Evenly Matched is going to be in most people's side decks. I feel like this is a powerful card going into the next format, just because not that many decks are ending up on Omni Negates. The only deck that's really, truly doing that is something like the Manadiums, and that's about it. Like, every other deck does somewhat die to Evenly Matched, so that's just a worry you have to worry about. I think it's going to be in most people's side decks. Crossout. I think this is niche. I usually put it in garbage just because I don't know. I mean, it's a really garbage card, but I think I put it in niche just because this format is going to a point where Droll and Lockbird is going to be in most people's main decks now. And if you're a deck that dies to Droll, you probably want to play the Crossout, right? But that's probably the only situation I can see Crossout being in, and that's about it. So we'll put it in niche for now. Maybe it goes higher up later in the format. Anti-Spell Fragrance. It's probably in most people's side decks just because, I mean, it's anti-spell, right? So it's a very powerful card. I mean, being able to turn off spells for a turn is always going to be powerful, especially if you can do OTK through it, right? So yeah, probably going to be in most people's side decks. Cosmic Cyclone, it's all right. We'll put it in some side decks. It's probably fine. I don't think it's going to be in most people's, maybe probably in some side decks. It does have better targets now, like against Centurion, being able to hit the field spell so they can't quick effect Synchro Summon is always going to be nice. Being able to hit the Fire King continuous spell or the Fire King Island as well is pretty nice. So probably going to be in some people's side decks. Ghost Spell in Haunted Mansion is getting a little better just because, again, the Fire Kings are in the format now. And this also hits Labyrinth as well. So I can see this in most people's side decks, maybe. Some, maybe creeping towards some main decks. I can see it in most people's side decking. Now, we're in a format that Ghost Spell is now getting better. So, yeah, I'm going to put it in most people's side decks. Triple Tactic Thrust, always going to be in most people's side decks. Being able to search, you know, any normal spell trap is going to be nice, especially like the Thrust or the talents, sorry. But there's other cards like, you know, Change of Heart and stuff like that as well that you can search out, especially like Feather Duster as well. I think this is probably in most people's side decks. Bestials. We'll include all the Bestials like Druisworm and Magnemut. Again, probably going to be in most people's side decks right now because it doesn't really hit that much right now, like especially if Tier falls off thanks to Yugioh Kelbeck being banned. If it falls off, it doesn't really have that much of a good target except for maybe like Labyrinth, and if Unchained is still a playable deck, maybe Unchained as well. But we're moving towards like more of a fire format, so I think DD Crow might be a little better than what Bestials can do right now. But the Bestials do offer free bodies as well, so that is a consideration as well. Droll and Lockbird, oh boy. I think this is going to be in some people's main decks. It's creeping towards most people's main decks. I feel like we're entering a format where Droll does hit a lot. So you probably want most main decks, but it doesn't hit some like the Lab matchup, which is, you know, rough, right? So this is probably going to be in some people's main decks. And, you know, it's a very powerful card. I can see it being for sure in most people's side decks, but I can see it in most main decks as well. So we'll put it in the middle in some main decks. Droll, absolutely going to be powerful this format. Phantasme. This feels weird. It's probably going to be in most people's side decks. Just because, I mean, it's Phantasme, like the Fire Kings are probably going to be linking off. The Rescues are going to be linking off, right? So Phantasme does have multiple things it can hit, right? So pretty nice, especially if Unchained's still a deck as well. Like it's going to hit the Unchained matchup as well. So I can see this being in most people's side decks for sure. Fenrir is probably going to be in some people's main decks. Is it going to be in most people's main decks? Maybe. I'll put it like up here with Droll. It can be in most people's main decks, but I can see it in side decks as well. I think it's going to be in some main decks just because Fenrir is a powerful card for sure. Lightning Storm is the same thing as Feather Duster. You're going to be in most people's side decks. It's good for the back row matchups. Marionette Might, garbage. It was garbage before the last ban list, but now it is garbage now because Unchained probably falls off a little bit. So I don't think this is that good of a card. Put it in garbage. Dimensional Barrier. Okay, so Dimensional Barrier is a powerful card. If you're playing like the Purely or the Branded, right? Like obviously D-Barrier just kills you, right? But the one thing I have to say about it is Labyrinth. A deck that can very frequently get to this card is not even main decking it anymore. That's where we're going with Dimensional Barrier right now. So I can see this in like the top of some people's side decks, right? Just because Dimensional Barrier doesn't really hit the Fire King matchup, doesn't hit the Rescue Ace matchup. Like it's not that great of a card right now. This is the reason why Labyrinth moved it to the side deck, because sometimes it's just a dead card in the main deck, so you want to be prepared for that. So yeah, I think this is probably in some side decks for right now. Tikaboo, so glad it is gone. This is we're going to include Rivalry and Gozen in here as well in this slot. It's a niche. I think it being at 1 now just like, it's not that great because you're not going to see it as often, right? So, like, I don't know, maybe some side decks, I don't know. We'll put it in niche for now. Nibiru the Primal Being. This is the interesting one. It can go into most people's side decks. It can be in some main decks as well. I can see it going either way. I'm going to put it in most side decks just because I think Droll is a tad better. So I can see this in most people's side decks for at least at the beginning of the format. Maybe later on we can see this moving towards into some main decks. But for right now, I'm going to put it in most people's side decks. Gamma, it's niche. I mean, the problem with Gamma is it's at 1. That's the real problem with Gamma. It's a good hand trap, but it being at 1 makes it where it's very niche. Herald of the Abyss is going to be in some side decks. This should be just basically because Thrust exists, and that's about it. Impulse. Oh boy, I feel like this is a funny ass tech card. So I'm going to put it with most side decks with Phantasme, like right here. Very funny card. I like the interactions that Impulse sets up, especially since a lot of decks are searching now. So Impulse into the Fire Attacker being able to draw 2, discard 1. Sometimes that discard 1 is better than bottom decking it with Phantasme, right? And you don't really need to wait for a Link Monster. I'm going to put it above Phantasme, actually. So yeah, we're going to keep it in most people's side decks. Snatch Steal. I think I put it with the Change of Heart because it's at 1. Like, Mind Control is next. We'll talk about that. I think Mind Control is going to be in most people's side decks if you are going to play Mind Control, just because it's at 3, unlike Change of Heart and Snatch Steal, where they're only at 1. So, like, yeah, I think Mind Control being at 3 probably puts it in most people's side decks. If you want to play the full pack at 3 Mind Control, 1 Change of Heart, 1 Snatch Steal, I can see that as well. So we're going to keep it like that. I don't think this is going to, unless you're playing like Sky Striker exactly, I don't think these are going to be main decked at all. Pankratops is now at 2, and I think it's going to be in most people's side decks. We'll put it there. I think it's pretty good. Pankratops being at 2 is just going to be powerful. Like, having 3 Fenrir, 2 Pankratops is now going to be very, very nice. Very good to see this come off at 2 now. And then I have Ghost Bell. We already talked about Ghost Bell. So that is it for the tier list. I did not explain as much as I usually do just because we had a shit ton of cards to talk about, but I think I like where the tier list is at. Most people's main deck, Ash, Triple Attack Talents, Imperm. I think that makes sense. Some people's main decks, Droll, it's moving into the format because a lot of decks are dying to Droll now. Fenrir is always just Fenrir. DD Crow, you know, I explained why DD Crow is here. This can be where later in the format it falls off, but for right now I'm going to put it in some main decks. Super Poly, it's Super Poly. It hits a lot. I think it's going to be in some people's main deck. And Shifter, if you're able to play Shifter, you're going to main deck it, but not all decks can play Shifter, so that's why it's not in most main decks. Most side decks, I think Nib, Thrust, I mean, this all makes sense all here. Nib, Thrust, Druis Worm, Pankratops, Feather Dust, Lightning Storm, evenly matched. You know, cards that are only good going second is going to be in most side decks. Some side decks are like cards that can come up, but aren't as great just because where the format is right now. Niche is, well, just cards that can theoretically come up, but I don't think it's really that great. And garbage, I mean, why would you ever play these cards in this format, in my opinion? So yeah, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe for more content on the channel, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.